Guys, thanks again for tuning in. Today we're talking about the autonomic nervous system. We talked about the central nervous system in the last few videos, which is all about the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe, the motor input, output and the sensory input and the cerebellum and how that coordinates things. Now we're going to start talking about the autonomic nervous system, which is really part of the brain that looks after regulating our vital signs and our respiratory rate, our heart rate, our blood pressure, even down to our sleep patterns, our ability to be hungry and for the sex drive to come in. And so when we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, we're really talking about, I'll get my brain, the sympathetic nervous system and of course the parasympathetic nervous system. Now these are your two arms to the autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system really we know as the fight or flight response, or the fight or flight system, which when you think about sympathetic nervous system, you think increased heart rate, increased respiratory rate, blood pumping, adrenaline coming out. And when we think about the parasympathetic nervous system, we think about the ability to rest and recover, and they call it the feed and breed and digest, which is, you know, ability to be hungry and our ability or our tendency to have that libido and sex drive, and our tendency to rest and digest our food. And it really does make a difference depending on which nervous system is more dominant as to which of those functions are going to work properly or not work at all. So the example is if you're in fight or flight and you're anxious and you're feeling a little bit threatened for some reason, then you can't expect the parasympathetic nervous system type functions to be really working very well. And in other words, you're not going to be getting much rest, you're not going to be getting good recovery, you're not going to be getting that ability to digest properly, so you might have gut related problems. Of course, we know that we don't really get an appetite when we're in a threat response, and we certainly see people that are in that sort of threat response on a chronic level with an anxiety sort of type presentation having gut related disorders. Whether or not that's coming from the brain to the gut or the gut back up to the brain is a different story, but it certainly has influence downwards to the gut. So when we're talking about performance, this autonomic nervous system is really the holy grail is trying to become in control of the autonomic nervous system, which essentially sounds impossible because by name it is autonomic, but we do have a top-down from frontal lobe control over what's happening more back in the primary primitive parts of the brain that are looking after that sort of swinging functions. Now, the problem is when we're exercising too much and we're getting in that sympathetic sort of exercise mode, which doesn't necessarily need to be a fight or flight moment, a threat situation. It just means that we're in that high energy state where our adrenaline's pumping and we're exercising hard. Okay, if we're doing too much of that and not swinging back into rest and recovery, then we start becoming fatigued and we start becoming catabolic and breaking things down and using too much energy, and that's when we start falling apart. So on a performance level, or on a performance perspective, from a performance perspective, we want to know that we're getting into rest and recovery after we've done our training session. And I always think that if you're an elite athlete and you've got that drive and you're working hard and training hard, it's really not about whether or not you can train harder. It's really about whether or not you can train smarter. And mastering your recovery and mastering your sleep and your nutrition and your mind and the digestion and your parasympathetic nervous system is really underrated. Okay, and I think if you can learn to master that, then you can learn to really take advantage of the training loads that you're given. Otherwise, you're not adapting in between sessions. You know, you're not getting that sleep and growing and adapting your body to the forces or the stimulus, the resistance, or the load that you're putting onto it, which is essentially what it's all about for getting high performance. So when it comes to the autonomic nervous system, the easiest, cheapest, most basic way to start controlling it is through our breath. Okay, so we have the ability to breathe in and breathe out as we want in time that we dictate. When I say we, our mind dictates, or we have the ability to switch off and thankfully not have to worry about it. Otherwise life would suck if we had to worry about every breath in and out and had to give attention to that. In other words, it becomes autonomic or automatic. Now, you can use your breath to start taking control over something that is otherwise autonomic. Okay, so when you start to feel like you're getting in a bit of fight or flight, particularly in a competitive environment, you start having these thoughts of, am I good enough? Have I done enough preparation? That threat starts coming in. It really helps to take a little bit of a time out to just override what's happening on the autonomic nervous system breath front, and start breathing out a little bit slower and slowing your breath down. We know that they teach you in meditation to slow your breath right down, and that takes like a manual override onto that autonomic nervous system respiratory rate and starts manually readjusting you into the parasympathetic nervous system state, which is of course super necessary and such a powerful thing to be able to do. Learning how to do it is another thing, okay, and learning how to jump in and make sure you're aware of this before it gets too far is the other part. So the autonomic nervous system, super important. We'll talk more about breath at some stage, but the theory behind the autonomic nervous system is it's automatic, but we can take some control over it if we learn how to become interoceptive and we start thinking about what's actually happening through our mind, through our body, and then we start taking action to change that. So I hope that makes a lot of sense, or a little bit of sense. Thanks for tuning in again, and that was autonomic nervous system.